Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating framework on human existence. We're going straight to the source material. 来自生命禅院 Lifechanyuan 导游雪峰的教诲和著作, The Teachings and Writings of Xue Feng, the Guide of Lifechanyuan. He lays out this very specific, incredibly layered way of understanding exactly where we spend our life's energy and, well, the heavy consequences of those everyday choices. I mean, look at this. Is your life destined to be a tragedy, a farce, or a paradise? That's quite the hook, right? It's a pretty heavy question. But according to Xu Feng's writings, your answer completely depends on which world you actively choose to inhabit on a daily basis. So let's map out exactly what he means by that. Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to look at the three worlds of life, and then take a structured ascent through them, starting with the heavy material world, moving up to the light spiritual world, and finally reaching the ethereal soul world. Then we'll wrap up by looking at the architecture of wealth and how to actually choose your true focus. Let's get right to it. All right, part 1, the three worlds of life, understanding Xu Feng's core framework. The fundamental idea here is that life as we know it is not just one monolithic experience. The source text actually divides our existence into three completely distinct realms. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how neatly it maps out all of existence using this rhythmic rule of 3. Just look at the progression. We have the material world, the spiritual world, and the soul world. Notice the weight shifting here, going from heavy up to light and then to ethereal. Then check out the inhabitants: animals in the material plane, humans in the spiritual, and celestial beings, Buddhas and angels in the soul world. And finally, the ultimate outcome for each: tragedy, farce, and paradise. Let's really break down each of these levels, starting at the bottom. Which brings us to part 2, the heavy material world, the baseline of survival. This is where we began our ascent, at the absolute lowest and, frankly, heaviest plane of existence. So this is the baseline. The material world is defined by pure survival. It's about being constantly, relentlessly busy with food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. It's hyper-focused on the unavoidable physical cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And it's driven entirely by the hustle for fame, fortune, money, power, and status. It's basically the ultimate rat race. Xu Feng describes this world as tangibly heavy. It's a realm filled with anxiety, worry, and fear because you are completely tethered to your physical needs. And that leads us to this incredibly sobering thought directly from the text. No matter how you live, as long as you live in the material world, your life is destined to be a tragedy. Wow. I mean, it really forces you to reflect. If literally all your energy is spent just maintaining your physical ego and surviving, Xu Feng argues that the ultimate consequence is a tragic loop of inevitable decline. So, part 3, the light spiritual world, the pursuit of happiness. You might be wondering, how do we escape all that heaviness? Well, we pivot to the next level. If the material world is heavy, the spiritual world is light. This is a realm where people work hard for things like happiness, joy, freedom, and blessedness. It basically lifts you out of that grinding survival mode. Instead of just clawing for power or status, you're actively pursuing personal fulfillment. Honestly, this is where most people strive to be, right? And it definitely feels infinitely better than the material baseline. But here is where Xu Feng introduces a very surprising conclusion. He states, no matter how you live, as long as you live in the spiritual world, your life is destined to be a farce. Now, why a farce? Because even though your life is much lighter, you're still ultimately centered on yourself. It lacks a transcendent purpose. It's kind of like playing a video game where you're racking up points, but those points don't actually matter beyond your own temporary feelings. Let's move to part 4 and see how this builds. The ethereal soul world, the pinnacle of devotion. This is the ultimate peak of the Lifechanyuan framework. To really grasp this highest level, let's just hold the baseline definition of the spiritual world in our minds for a second. Working hard for personal happiness, joy, freedom, and blessedness. Now contrast that with the soul world, paying and devoting selflessly and unselfishly for joy, bliss, light, and auspiciousness. Do you see the profound shift there? The spiritual world is all about getting inward, what makes me happy. But the soul world? It's entirely about giving outward. It's an existence described in the teachings as ethereal, unrestrained, and elegant. And this brilliantly illustrates that final contrast. The spiritual world ultimately ends as a farce because of its self-centered limitation. But the soul world, that is destined to be like paradise. According to the teachings, this ethereal realm is where celestial beings, Buddhas, and angels reside. The idea is that by stepping entirely out of the ego and into selfless devotion, one enters a permanent state of bliss. Moving on to Part 5, the architecture of wealth, how the worlds interact. Now we're going to shift from the philosophical ascent to the practical reality of how wealth actually functions across these three realms. So there is a foundational dependency between the worlds. Think of it like building a house. Material wealth forms the concrete base that supports spiritual wealth. Then spiritual wealth forms the walls that support the roof, which is soul wealth. In fact, Xiaofeng notes that if you lack rich soul wealth, it's actually better to just stay securely in the spiritual world. You can't skip steps without a solid foundation to stand on. So the crucial point is revealed right here in this highly counterintuitive formula. You might think you have to choose between material, spiritual, or soul wealth, right? But actually, Zufeng says if you achieve the highest level, soul wealth, it automatically brings spiritual wealth, which in turn automatically brings material wealth. Achieving the highest state actually encompasses the lower ones. You don't lose the material or the spiritual. They are simply brought into perfect alignment by focusing on the soul. Finally, Part 6, choosing your true focus, the human dilemma. Let's bring this all back down to earth, to our everyday physical reality. Zufeng is actually highly pragmatic here. He acknowledges that, as human beings with physical bodies, it is impossible not to live in the material world. We literally can't just pretend our physical needs don't exist, right? We must take care of all forms of wealth simultaneously. We need material resources to live, we need spiritual joy to feel alive, and we need soul devotion for ultimate meaning. The absolute key, however, is your focus. Wherever you actively place your focus dictates exactly which of the three worlds you truly inhabit. If you focus primarily on material wealth, you live in the tragedy. Focus on spiritual wealth, you live in the farce. But if you purposefully focus your energy on soul wealth, you actually elevate your existence to the paradise, even while walking around in a physical, everyday body. Which brings us to one final, deeply provocative thought from the source material. It's a jarring question that cuts through all the philosophical theory we just talked about and lands right in the messy reality of human life. Between money, affection, and sex, which one are you willing to choose?